Welcome to a very special NCIX Tech Tips introduction to the GeForce GTX 770. Now what you might have noticed about this graphics card already is that it is extremely fine and sexy. But there are also some things you might not have noticed about this particular card. Number one is that compared to the GTX 670 that it's replacing, it does use the same GK104 core, but it has more SMX units enabled, just as many as the older GTX 680, and so you actually can't tell this just looking at the card. The memory clock speed is now 7 gigahertz, which is more than the older GTX 680. So this will not only be faster than the second tier down card that it replaces, the 670, but it will be faster than the 680, which was the older flagship card that it is not replacing, but is definitely replacing in terms of price to performance. The next critical features actually kind of work together. So that is GPU Boost 2.0, which allows you to not only set up the boost clocks of your GPU based on sort of how it interprets the amount of power it's consuming and how that affects the clock speed, but now temperature is also a factor. So all you have to do is go, GTX 770, I would like you to operate at no more than this voltage and no more than this temperature, and it'll clock itself as high as it can go according to those parameters that you set. So if you go, I'm comfortable with 90 degrees, it'll operate at 90 degrees. If you say, I prefer 70 degrees, it'll operate at 70 degrees, and it'll be 80 degrees by default. Here's the performance upgrade. So according to NVIDIA, they figure anyone who hasn't upgraded in a couple gens, so someone upgrading from a 570 is going to get about a 65% performance upgrade by moving to a new gen 700 series card. Ah yes, and this is the slide I was actually looking for, which is the noise dampened fan now features an upgraded fan profile that keeps it much steadier sounding in addition to being quieter overall. So rather than unnecessary ramp ups and ramp downs, in order to maintain that temperature target that the card has, a lot of the time, the way temperature targets work is it'd be like until the temperature comes down. That is gone, so it allows it to smooth itself out, so it's quieter and much less annoying sounding compared to older fan profiles. So while this isn't a flagship class card with an 8 in the middle of the product number, NVIDIA is positioning it clearly against the Radeon HD 7970 GHz edition, and from the figures that they've shown, it looks like it's going to be a pretty tight race. Not only that, but because the GTX 770 is based on the same GPU as the outgoing GTX 680, we are seeing some very interesting non-reference designs right here at launch. This is the Msi Gtx 770 Lightning Edition card. It has a backplate, a custom PCB, it has a dual fan cooler. It is an absolute beast and it overclocks like crazy. That was one of the things that I have observed in the past, is that the older 670 and 680 didn't overclock quite to the same degree as the 7950 and 7970, meaning that once you cranked everything up, they weren't as competitive as they were at stock. It looks like that may be a thing of the past, particularly with some of these aftermarket designs. Another thing that 770 does, and this is something that the entire GeForce lineup does, is it has built-in hardware that cooperates with the drivers to make sure that the frames delivered are not only fast, but also smooth. This is known as a way of controlling frame latency. So when you see a hiccup or a stutter in your game, that's caused by frame latency, and the overall frame rate and performance of the card might be just fine. So particularly SLI versus Crossfire, GTX 770 is going to deliver a smoother experience in terms of frame latency, even if that's not necessarily reflected by the FPS numbers recorded by Fraps. Ah, and the Geforce Experience. The Geforce Experience is all about making sure that when you buy this card, you're actually getting the performance that you paid for, making sure that it gives you suggestions for things like what to tweak your games at, what settings you should run, as well as keeping your drivers up to date for you without you really having to think about it. It launched out of beta with the GTX 780, so obviously the 770 is supported as well, and there will be more features coming in the Geforce Experience, such as Shadow Play, which uses the H.264 encoder built into the card to deliver only about a 5% performance hit, assuming you leave leave it on all the time, and your card can sit there and act as a buffer, constantly filling up about 20 minutes, up to 20 minutes, of gameplay into a folder that's encoded, so it's not going to be huge files like you get generated with Fraps. And so no matter what's going on, if you just kind of run it all the time, you can be like, oh, that was really cool, that thing that just happened, I can go back and get it out of the Shadowplay cache, and you are ready to create your own masterpiece of a gameplay video. SLI support, 2-way, 3-way, 4-way, NVIDIA Surround in 3D Vision supported with up to 3 displays in surround and 1 auxiliary display. And of course, it requires a 6-pin and an 8-pin PCI Express power connector, just like the outgoing GTX 680. As well as having that, oh man, see, I can't get over this, that sexy cooler with the aluminum construction, the quiet fan, and the glowing GeForce logo on the top that makes your case look awesome on its own, and you can even set it up to be dimmer or brighter or have pulsating effects and all that kind of cool stuff. So there you go, guys. The GTX 770 is here, and it's here to stay. At least until the next big thing from NVIDIA. Don't forget to subscribe to NCIX Tech Tips for more videos like this one from your favorite detailer, ncix.com.